and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Professor Aijaz Ahmad and we'll discuss the Minsk II Accord. Aijaz, this is a rerun of what we saw earlier. We had the Minsk I Accord, the ceasefire in Ukraine did not hold, our battles have started again, and this is almost a very similar kind of agreement. Do you think it's likely to hold?
I would say it's unlikely to hold. The first 48 hours or so have not been very promising anyway. That said, I think it would really depend on how the Europeans in general and Germans in particular actually act. They have been postponing, I believe, a decision on their relationships with the United States. The US has been pushing them and they have been obeying on a very belligerent line towards Russia. Americans have, I believe, a very clear-cut view. No compromise on Ukraine. This is where the new Cold War, even a certain degree of hot war, is going to be fought in order to prevent any unity between Russia and EU, keep EU under the US hegemony and make it confront Russia and gradually replace Russia as a source of energy. The Americans and the Canadians and all of these people believe that they can slowly start doing that. On the other hand, Europe cannot afford this. They cannot afford another war in Europe. So when about a quarter of the army of the Kiev government is really surrounded at the moment.
Debaltseve cauldron, as it is called.
Right. And these people ran to obtain a ceasefire and some way of getting them out of there. That is all this was about, I believe.
But the lines have closed around the Debaltseve cauldron, as it is called.
Absolutely.
So they're encircled.
They're completely...
And the ceasefire actually says between the two regions, and the Donetsk and Lugansk regions are saying, well, it's our region, they're within our region, so we can let them go, but we won't let them go with arms.
That's right. And we will not let them go. We won't even cease fire unless you cease fire. And the agreement actually provides for the heavy weaponry to be withdrawn. Minsk refuses to do that. So they are in violation of it on the very first day. They are a party to this.
Actually, they are not. They haven't signed the agreement.
That's right.
In fact, it's signed by Kuchma on their behalf.
That's right. He didn't go. Moreover, the right sector, whose militias are involved, and some of whose militia members are actually encircled in there, has openly refused to accept it and says we are going to continue to fight. So if the most important fascist militia is going to keep on fighting, and if Minsk refuses to withdraw its weaponry,
Kiev refuses to withdraw
its weaponry, it's dead upon arrival.
Interestingly enough, this was done by Hollande and Merkel. So they have put their prestige on line, as it were, to try and reach an agreement with Russia. But they have, on the following day, imposed fresh sanctions on Russia.
Absolutely.
So this is, if it was to de-escalate the situation in Russia, how do you interpret these new sanctions?
That's exactly what they did after the first one.
True.
That's exactly what they did after the first one. This is to placate the Americans. So they have to make up their mind. They can't sort of sign one agreement one day to improve relations with Russia, and next day sanction Russia in order to placate the Americans. And this is really Merkel's game. Hollande will have to go along with Merkel. The decision really lies with her.
So we are in a situation where the war is really not going to stop. It looks like Ukrainian forces, the Kiev regime's forces in Debaltseve will have to surrender, because all these cauldrons form because the forces surrounded cannot break out of it. So if they couldn't break out of it earlier, before it closed on them, then their ability to break out of it after it has closed, the cauldron has really, they have been completely encircled, seems less likely.
Right.
So we are in a situation where the Lugansk, Donetsk regions are on the ascendancy militarily.
They are on the ascendancy militarily, and that is why the Kiev government doesn't want to withdraw the weaponry. Although my sense is that if they were to cease fire and withdraw it, there would be a lot of Russian pressure on the federalists to de-escalate and perhaps even let go those people and so on. Russia desperately is trying to de-escalate the situation as much as possible and be a good boy and so on. But anyway, that's not going to happen. Germans are making an impossible demand for Russia to close its borders with Lugansk. It's impossible. They can't survive without the humanitarian aid coming in from Russia. So they really have to make up their mind, and I believe time is running out. Time is running out also because there are three issues I would isolate. One, in the United States itself, there is now a very big pressure on Obama to provide as much as maybe $200 billion worth of lethal arms, it is being called. Soros has jumped into this and said 50 billion has to be given in, while he gives 10 billion to the Democratic Party. So this is one issue. So far, Obama has resisted that. How long he can resist, one doesn't know, especially if it starts building up inside his Democratic Party, while he has this spat with Netanyahu and so on. That's one issue. The other issue is that by the end of this year, Ukraine has to pay a couple of $100 billion to Russia. I forget the exact figure, but a huge debt which is coming due, and they have no money. The agreement that they have reached with IMF says, the letter of it is, that IMF will not release any money so long as Ukraine is at war. So if the Kiev government does not abide by the ceasefire, so long as it does not abide by the ceasefire, it cannot actually get money from IMF, upon which they are banking, and without which they truly can neither run their own economy nor pay the Russians by the end of the year. Now, a sovereign debt, not paying a sovereign debt, is a very serious matter. How all of these factors are going to play out over the next 6 months with Kiev's intransigence, and Kiev's intransigence is American intransigence.
Clearly. That's where the support is coming from.
Yeah. If this is what Americans want, if this is what Americans are going to continue with, all these factors will play up and create a havoc in Ukraine.
Of course, Russia is also at a disadvantage because of the oil price collapse.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's one of the reasons it wants to de-escalate the Ukrainian issue?
Yeah, you see, certainly the oil prices. But in the financial markets, they can, what they have done to the ruble once. Now the Russians have stabilized it a bit. So long as the financial markets generally and oil markets particularly are structured around the dollar, the vulnerability of countries like Russia are quite immense because of their dependence on energy exports. Sure. So that is, I think, very much the reason for their doing that. There is also that, I think that dream with which this generation of Putin and all, Gorbachev down to Putin, dismembered the Soviet Union. We will become part of Europe. We are Europeans. Europe will accept us. When we become a part of Europe, we'll be prosperous like Europe. We'll be part of the integrated EU economy. Last week, one of their high officials, I forget which one, Lavrov maybe, says there has to be an EU from Vladivostok to Madrid. This is what we want. I mean, essentially saying, please stop this Ukraine business. You can take over. You can bring Russia into the EU and so on. So for this whole generation, if I play it right, Europe will somehow accept me. I think ideologically there is that. There's the economic pressure of oil prices and so on, but there's also this ideological pull towards the West.
Integrating with the West and becoming the West, which they still are not recognized as it were. And it's also interesting because a lot of the latent racism has actually developed sharply both in Russia as well in Eastern Europe.
Oh, yes.
And a lot of it is really ethnic white nationalism.
Absolutely, and it is so much the opposite of what it used to be during the Soviet period, both in Eastern Europe and Russia.
Also interesting that people think that these are latent things which are always there. Ukraine was borderlands. It did not have an identity. This identity was created in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
A part of it by Soviet Union itself.
Absolutely. I mean, this bogus claim on Crimea, for example, but also this identity and this multilingual identity.
Ukraine is essentially borderlands. That's what it means.
That's right.
So borderlands don't have identity of their own. So that has been but it has been its ethnic identities have flowered, as it were, within quotes, in all over this place. Of course, we're seeing it in Germany as well, but there is this whole racist sort of identity being forged. And what you're talking about is the dream to integrate with Europe being
of the bourgeoisie. This bourgeoisie and high professional class and so on, they want to be part of Europe.
Thanks, Aijaz. Again, it's an interesting issue, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, and what we metamorphose into. So we'll keep watching Ukraine as the things develop. Thank you very much.
Thank you.